Now, peptide hormones, they involve these bonds between two amino acids, and these amino acids, when they form this bond between them, this is a specific type of bond, and it's between what we call the carboxyl group right here and this amino group. And just know that I just think, okay, it's between the carbon and the nitrogen. But what do you call, so this part right here, this bond that formed over between this carbon and nitrogen atom, this is a peptide bond. Now these link amino acids, and when you have a long chain of these, you eventually get a polypeptide and a protein, right? So what do you call a longer polymer? And what if you have this start to daisy chain these amino acids over and over again? This is what you call a polypeptide. And this might be reviewed for some of you, but again, if you're starting out with 142, this is the most I'll retread on this stuff. Now, proteins and 20 different amino acids. There's technically 21 in the human body, but there's the 20 standard ones. But what we have, if you're not including selenocysteine, but amino acids, I'm representing them by balls because why? They have similar structures but slightly different. If you look at that previous graphic with all the 21 type of amino acids, they have different what we call variable groups. But again, that's more something for, I think, your cell molecular biology classes. But basically you have these 20 different ones, and they can be daisy chained and linked together via these peptide bonds. So here we have a peptide bond between two amino acids, and if you have a bunch of these together, like you have many peptide bonds. And something you see when there's like many of something in science and medicine, a common prefix we use is poly. So these are many peptide bonds, so therefore this is a polypeptide. So polypeptides are chains of amino acids linked with all these peptide bonds together. Now peptide hormones, these are chains of amino acids. And I'm not going to show, you saw how complicated those amino acid structures were earlier. I'm not going to draw out the entire structure. We don't have time. It'll be very confusing. But peptide hormones, these can be stored like neurotransmitters. They can be stored in these little bubbles of membranes called vesicles for later secretion. So this is why they're pretty useful, because you might not need the peptide hormone, but you can store it for later. And here is a hormone that might sound familiar. You may have heard of insulin. And in this, all these little beads right here, these are representing amino acids. I'm not going to ask you to memorize exactly how many amino acids and what places they are in this one, but I want you to appreciate that, look, it looks like there's two polypeptide chains, right? But the funny thing about insulin is not, when it's first made in your cells, it's not in this form. It actually starts out as one intact polypeptide chain. So it actually starts out as one big polypeptide chain. It's just that once it becomes insulin, it actually cut off this part right here. So that part is called C-peptide, but that's more like, you don't need to know it at this level right now. But if you're going to medicine, it's a pretty important thing to know, because there are tests that kind of also look at that protein as well. So peptide hormones, they're important because the largest group of hormones, and they include all the hormones from your pituitary gland. And these, I think also your OpenStax book includes glycoproteins in this category as well. For the intents and purposes of this class, I consider glycoproteins in the same category as peptide and protein hormones. It's just like glyco, another useful prefix. If glyco is somewhere in the name, you know that some sort of carbohydrate is involved somewhere in the body. So what happens to the other part? Yeah, so that's an interesting thing. Like some of these, many things in your body actually, like if they get processed and what we call post-translation modification, and sometimes they get recycled, sometimes they get broken down, or sometimes these byproducts have their own effect. Like when you talk about things like, if you're taking neuroscience and neurobiology, if you talk about amyloid proteins, oh, that's where these byproducts that are from all these like processing of peptides, that's where it can get really complicated, but it's also important. But that's a little rabbit hole we don't need to get to at this level. All right, so peptide hormones include insulin and all these hormones here. Hey, actually, that's the funny thing. All these pictures here I'm showing you are insulin. This is showing you insulin, but using that kind of skeletal structure, showing you all the amino acids linked together. And this is why when you're drawing these diagrams, like people are representing this, they're not going to use this whole chemical structure right here. Would you rather have to recognize this or look at something like this? And over here is actually showing you more of a 3D structure of insulin. So insulin can also, this is just showing you a linear structure right here, but when insulin is actually folded onto itself. So these are the secondary structures and tertiary structures when these amino acids are folded into different shapes. So all the same way of showing the same hormones, but what do they have? Remember, this is insulin, right? It's made up from a polypeptide. It's a long chain of something. It's just showing you different ways of representing it. So if you see something like this, like a chain of beads, or if you see these, like these ribbon structures, this is probably referring to some sort of peptide or polypeptide hormone. So it's like saying, like, show me a picture of hair. Well, yeah, this is showing you the very detailed, zoomed up close version of hair. Or this could be also a picture of hair, or this could be a picture of hair right here. It's just different ways and different zooming out at different levels of showing the same structure of something. But typically when you see a peptide or polypeptide hormone, they use either this structure or this structure. Rarely this structure, because again, that's way more detailed than we need to know at this point.